Welcome to Insanity Fair. Today I'd like to talk about an issue that I've seen in coverage of the American Republican primaries, the nomination race. Something that's come up very often and that Donald Trump has exploited very well is this feeling that American jobs are being taken away. Typically they're being taken away to Mexico, and people obviously feel that this is very unfair. They feel that this is a violation of their rights, their birthright as Americans. Now, in Britain, there's been a similar process. It's not exactly the same, but I think that looking at that will help Americans to understand what's happening in America, and maybe put a different kind of spin on this question, which is obviously an important social question. Now, in America, when we talk about blue-collar jobs, we're talking about manufacturing industry, steel, heavy industry, traditional industrial work, and these are global markets, and so obviously there's international competition. But there's another aspect to this, which is the class system. And in America, when you say that people are working class, middle class, and so on, you often talk about people's middle class aspirations. You're just talking about their level of income. And so the idea is that somebody can be an honest factory worker, they can go and they can do a good job, work hard, and then they can become middle class, meaning that they will have a certain material level. And this whole process has been sabotaged by the development of capitalism, so that all of the excess money that's being produced is now just being siphoned off by the 1%. But that masks a different process, I think. In Britain, when you talk about people being working class, you don't just mean that they're poor. We can explain what's happened, fairly rapidly. At one time, up until the 18th century anyway, you had a mainly agricultural society, so that the largest single group of people in this society of workers were what Marx called rural proletariat, people who've now disappeared, day labourers in agriculture, who were, very ignorant people, little or no schooling, and just local people, stayed where they were. Now they became the world's first industrial proletariat, because Britain was the first country to be industrialised, and there was no regulation or anything, and so they were herded into industrial towns and put into very cramped living conditions. One consequence of this was that English cooking was destroyed, because these houses often didn't have kitchens. So the only cooking that could be done was on the fireplace. And these people then became the industrial working class, and now those people are still the working class, and they're mainly marked out by being culturally degraded. They often still speak the dialects of the original country people that they came from, in their accents and the words that they use. But they developed this pride. There was this pride in being working class. And that has now become a very dysfunctional feature of these people, because it's a pride in being a hard worker, which means that you're proud of being ignorant. That you know that you very often now, they've had generations of opportunities for schooling, that there's been very good public education, certainly one of the best education systems in the world, perhaps the best education system in the world. And yet generations of working class people have deliberately not taken advantage of it, because it's seen that that is something that would be a sign of weakness to try and opt out, because if you're a real man, then you're going to go and you're going to be a miner or a steel worker or a factory worker, and so the education is irrelevant. Now, what's happened is that the opportunities to work have disappeared, and that's because of globalization. Now, we didn't have the idea that, these foreigners have stolen the jobs. Not really. There were more complex reasons for it. But now you have the situation where you have whole cities which are working class cities, because they were cities which only sprung up into existence as industrial centres. And you've got the white working class people there, and they still speak the local dialect, so they have a very strong local sense. And they would still be identified by other people and by themselves as working class. But there was a funny moment on a BBC radio programme a couple of years ago, where the very middle class BBC wanted to go and do an investigation into the working class, and so they went to Manchester, and they found a working class woman who was quite articulate, and this is a problem because often these people are not articulate, and she had written a book or something, and so she had presented herself as a representative of the working class. And she was showing the presenter of the program around this this suburb of Manchester, and he said, "So you'd say that the people around here are working class then?" And she said, "Oh yes, they are." And he said, "Well, so how would you define that then? I mean, I suppose they all work then." And you could hear in the silence that followed, there was this pregnant silence that she'd never heard such a stupid question, and then she had to explain, well, no, they don't work, no, they're on benefits, on welfare, and that mostly they take heroin. So calling them working class has now become something of a misnomer, because the work in Britain is no longer work of this kind. There's a little high-tech manufacturing industry, but that kind of unskilled or semi-skilled work which used to exist just isn't there anymore. Now, if we get back to America, what I would suggest is that actually you can interpret what's happening in the same way. I know this is not the way that Americans would like to see it, because the idea is that there is the American dream, and so you can go and you can work, and if you do this honest work, then you will become richer. You will become middle class in that sense. And if you manage to get your children into law school or whatever it is, they could even then become upper class, meaning rich. These possibilities don't really exist in Britain. It's very, very difficult for people once they've got that. If they're brought up speaking a working class dialect in particular, no one will ever believe that they're middle class. Certainly not upper class. Although there's social mobility of a different kind. You can have, working class heroes. You're not. There's a lot more. It's a lot more open than it used to be. But now in America, you see, I think that people are actually working class in that British sense now. The blue collar people who've been doing this for generations, they are now in this downward death spiral. And the death spiral is moving towards a different kind of degradation. There's more space. People aren't sort of crammed. White working class people are not crammed into ghettos in the same way that they are in Britain. Housing projects, you'd call them. There are huge estates, especially in the Midlands and the North, in the heavily industrialised centres, where there's lots of organised crime, but petty organised crime, drugs, alcoholism, some prostitution, but basically just degradation. Basically, people sitting around watching television all day, never had a job, parents haven't had a job, no prospect of getting out of it at all. And that's a sort of, it's a kind of trailer trash way of life. Now the difference is that there's no sense that they've had anything stolen from them, that their jobs have been taken away and stolen and taken to Mexico or anything like that, because they didn't own the British system to start with. It's always been owned by the rich. But it's a complicated thing. But it used to be big landowners. Then those people moved into finance. But there's never been any sense in which the working class could feel that Britain belonged to them, that they had any say in what was going to happen. Whereas in America, there has been this idea that these people, blue-collar Americans, are the real Americans. They're the people who really have a right to the American system and the American dream. And I think that they don't. I think that what's happening now is that this is finally collapsing. That however much Donald Trump or anybody else may try and put up barriers and protectionist systems, this idea that it's okay to be an unthinking worker who just puts in the time at the plant and then goes and listens to country music and gets drunk and then goes back and clocks in and works and so on, that's enough, I think, is now really past its sell-by date. And the white English working class are in Britain are so degraded now that it's difficult to see how they can ever be reintegrated. One thing is that a lot of them can no longer speak English. Really, they speak this this sort of druggy criminal patois, which is heavily influenced by Jamaican, actually, and it means that they're completely unemployable. And so if they're going to then bring their children up like that, how's it ever going to change? America is already, in my opinion, has this. It's happened to other populations, of course. It's happened to black people in city after city. But, those are still, in a way, marginal people in America, because America is still, geographically anyway, it's predominantly white, and it's predominantly white working class. and so that social change is something that is a very important issue in America, as, to return to my original point, as we've seen with these Republican primaries, as I suppose we will see as the election campaign progresses until November. But I think anybody that's promising to do anything about it is basically lying, or or is just not in touch with reality. Because I think that the whole idea of this this white working class way of life is now obsolete. Thank you.